Winter of 1942. The Eastern Front groaned beneath the weight of war. Towns were rubble, forests were burned, and the snow itself smelled of oil and death. And out of that frozen wasteland came a sound the Red Army had never heard before, a deep, thunderous growl that seemed to shake the ground. It wasn't artillery, it wasn't an aircraft, it was a tiger. When the Tiger One first appeared near Leningrad, Soviet gunners thought their rangefinders were broken. They fired round after round, 45mm, 57mm, even 76mm, and watched in disbelief as each shell bounced harmlessly off the German tank's thick hide. Some ricocheted skyward, others shattered on impact. Then the Tiger fired back. Its 88mm KWK-36 cannon spoke once, and a Soviet T-34 exploded, turret lifting into the air. That was all it took. The legend of the Tiger was born. The machine was unlike anything the Allies had seen. 60 tons of steel, nearly 4 inches of frontal armor, and a gun that could destroy anything that moved. Its silhouette was menacing. Broad tracks, square turret, and that monstrous deliberate rumble that echoed for miles. It was not just a tank. It was a symbol of German precision, of fear, of inevitability. On the Eastern Front, Soviet soldiers wrote home about a ghost tank that nothing could stop. And by the time the Tiger reached North Africa, the British found themselves facing the same nightmare. At Tunis, in early 1943, a single Tiger sat hull down on a ridge and destroyed 6 Churchill tanks in less than 15 minutes. The British guns hit back, dozens of shots, all in vain. Each one struck the Tiger's armor with a sharp metallic clang, leaving nothing but black scars. Tank commanders began marking maps with a single word that meant everything: Tiger. When it appeared, men called for artillery, for air support, for luck, because nothing else would save them. The Sherman tank, the pride of American industry, was agile and reliable but hopelessly outmatched. At close range, its 75mm shells barely scratched the Tiger's sides. At long range, they did nothing. A Sherman had to flank, get within 200 yards, and hit a Tiger from behind, a suicidal task on open ground. To Allied tankers, facing a Tiger wasn't combat. It was survival. Crews spoke of the sound, that low diesel growl followed by the thunder of the 88mm. It was a sound that froze blood long before the first shot was fired. By late 1943, morale among British armored units was sinking. They knew they could outfight the Germans in the air, at sea, and even in logistics. But on the ground, inside those armored coffins, they were losing. The British High Command needed an answer, fast. Designing a new tank would take years they didn't have. The Americans had already committed to the Sherman. It was dependable, it was everywhere, but it wasn't enough. So in a small workshop in Larkhill, Wiltshire, a handful of engineers and ordnance experts began to do something extraordinary. They took a Sherman, stripped it bare, and began forcing a weapon into it that by all logic shouldn't fit: the 17-pounder gun. It was Britain's most powerful anti-tank gun, long, heavy, and violent. It fired a shell that could tear through nearly 5 inches of steel at 1,000 yards, more than enough to kill a Tiger. But it was never meant for a Sherman. To make it work, they rotated the gun's breech, cut open the turret, and removed the radio from inside, relocating it to a box welded on the back. The recoil system was modified, the ammunition was redesigned, and the loader had to crouch awkwardly to operate. It was uncomfortable, cramped, and dangerous, but it worked. When they fired the first test round, the shot echoed across the plain. The shell struck a target plate meant to simulate Tiger armor and punched clean through. The engineers stared at the smoking hole in silence. It wasn't just a success. It was hope. The prototype was rushed into production. Dozens of Shermans were modified, each one armed with the same long, slender gun, so long it almost looked out of proportion to the rest of the tank. To keep the Germans from identifying it, crews painted the barrels with disruptive stripes, breaking the outline to look like a standard 75mm Sherman. The name came naturally: the Sherman Firefly, a tank that struck with light and vanished into smoke. It wasn't perfect. It was tall, slow to reload, and easy to spot if the camouflage failed. But it could do one thing no Allied tank could before: destroy a Tiger frontally at over 1,000 yards. When word spread through the armored regiments, disbelief turned to excitement. Finally, the Allies had something that could stand toe-to-toe with the monster. By May 1944, Fireflies were being assigned one per troop. 3 standard Shermans, and 1 Firefly. Their crews were told to hang back, wait, and strike when the enemy showed its heavy armor. They were the sniper of the armored battlefield, patient, precise, and deadly. In the spring rains of southern England, Firefly crews trained relentlessly for the invasion to come. They practiced coordination, concealment, and communication. They knew their survival depended on the first shot, because if they missed, the Tigers' return fire would be fatal. One veteran later said, "We didn't think of it as a tank. It was a hunter. We waited for the Tiger, and when we saw it, we aimed for the heart." As June approached, those hunters were loaded onto landing craft, each Firefly covered in waterproofing paste, each gun barrel secured for the rough sea ahead. They didn't know where they were going, only that they'd soon be facing the enemy on his own soil. And across the channel, in France, Tiger crews were waiting, confident, arrogant, unaware. They had no idea that the next time they rolled into battle, they'd be facing a Sherman that could finally bite back. The balance of fear was about to shift. June 1944. Normandy was burning. The invasion had begun. Thousands of ships lined the horizon, thousands of men fighting their way through hedgerows thick with mud, blood, and gunfire. For the Germans, it was chaos. For the Allies, it was hell. Among the waves of armor rolling off landing craft at Gold and Juno Beach were the first Sherman Fireflies, the British answer to years of fear and defeat under the Tiger's shadow. They looked like any other Sherman to the untrained eye, but to those who knew, they were different, deadlier, quieter. Each one carried a 17-pounder gun, long as a telegraph pole, capable of doing what no Allied tank had done since the war began: kill a Tiger from the front. The crews knew it too. They weren't just tankers anymore. They were hunters. By the second week of June, the battle for Normandy had turned into a brutal stalemate. The hedgerows trapped men and machines in a deadly maze: narrow lanes, stone walls, and fields so tight that tanks could barely turn. Visibility was often less than 50 yards. Engagements happened at point-blank range. The Germans held the high ground. From every orchard and every hedgerow, Panthers and Tigers waited in ambush. Their 75mm and 88mm guns cut through Allied armor like glass. Each time a Sherman rounded a corner, there was a flash, and then silence. But then came the Firefly. The 13th, 18th Royal Hussars were among the first to bring them into combat. In the chaos of Normandy's bocage, their Fireflies began striking back, long-barreled Shermans staying behind cover, scanning the fields for the faintest movement of German armor. On June 13th, near the village of Villers-Bocage, a single Tiger commanded by the famous SS officer Michael Whitman ambushed a British column, destroying 25 vehicles in minutes. For days afterward, Allied morale wavered. The Tiger seemed unstoppable once again. But barely a week later, near Nory-en-Bessin, the tables turned. A single Canadian Firefly, dug in behind a hedgerow, spotted a Tiger advancing through the village. The commander waited, counting the distance, adjusting the sight. The Tiger turned its turret, unaware. The Firefly fired once. The 17-pounder roared like thunder, and the shell hit square in the side. The Tiger stopped dead, flames pouring from its turret, smoke curling into the sky. The Canadian crew sat in stunned silence. It had worked. News spread fast. For the first time, a Sherman had destroyed a Tiger in open combat. Word reached every armored regiment in the British Second Army. The Firefly can kill them. From that moment, confidence began to shift. Tankers who once dreaded the black cross of German armor now looked for it, waiting for their chance to even the score. In the following weeks, the Fireflies earned their reputation the hard way. They fought through Longèves, Tilly-sur-Seulles, and the outskirts of Caen, where Tigers and Panthers guarded every crossroad. The British and Canadian crews learned to fight like snipers, not brawlers. They hid behind barns, behind stone walls, behind wrecked vehicles, always waiting for the perfect shot. They knew the first one mattered most. At Saint-Aignan-de-Craménil in August 1944, a platoon of Fireflies from the 1st Northamptonshire Yeomanry spotted a column of German tanks moving through open fields. Among them was a Tiger commanded by none other than Michael Whitman, the same man who had slaughtered an entire British column 2 months earlier. The Fireflies lay in ambush, engines off, waiting. The first Tiger appeared, Whitman's, followed by 3 more. The British commander gave a single order: "Hold fire!" They waited until the Tigers were within 800 yards. Then, the first Firefly fired. The shell tore through Whitman's Tiger from the side, igniting its ammunition. The explosion was enormous. Turret hurled clear into the air. The rest of the column panicked, reversing into chaos as the Fireflies fired again and again. When the smoke cleared, all 4 Tigers were burning, and the most feared tank commander in the German army was dead. The myth of invincibility died with him. From that day forward, the Tiger was no longer a god of war, it was prey. And the Firefly, the ugly, awkward, makeshift British design, had become the new king of the battlefield. Captured German reports from Normandy told the story. The enemy now possesses a version of the Sherman that can destroy even the Tiger from great distance. Crews must prioritize its elimination above all others. That line sealed its legend. The Germans feared the Firefly so much that in every engagement, they targeted it first. Crews began painting fake muzzle stripes on regular Shermans to confuse the enemy, while Firefly crews tried to hide their barrels under foliage until the last second. Every encounter became a game of nerves, a duel between speed and precision, armor and cunning. The Tiger still had power, still had presence, but now it was hunted by something leaner, faster, smarter, and in the hedgerows of France, where every road was death and every corner a gamble, the Firefly earned a name whispered in both English and German, the Equalizer. By August 1944, the tide in Normandy had turned. The fields that once belonged to the Tiger now belonged to the hunter. The Sherman Firefly had proven its worth, but its power came with a cost. Every time its long barrel flashed, the Germans learned to recognize it. To them, that extended muzzle meant death. So they adapted. Every time a Firefly appeared on the field, it became target number 1. German tank commanders would shout over their radios, "Fire on the long run! Fire at the long barrel!" Because they knew that as long as a Firefly lived, no Tiger was safe. The men inside those tanks understood what that meant. They weren't driving invincible machines. They were driving marked ones. So they learned to fight smarter. Firefly crews began hiding their tanks in the most unlikely places, behind hedgerows, in orchards, even inside the shadows of barns. Some covered their barrels in rags and branches to make them look shorter. Others parked behind regular Shermans to draw the enemy's fire, then swung out to deliver a killing shot. It was a deadly game of deception and patience. In one engagement near Montpinçon, a Firefly commander from the 2nd Northamptonshire Yeomanry waited nearly an hour for the perfect target. Through the sight, he watched a panther crawl across an open field, turret scanning, its crew unaware. When the moment came, he whispered to his gunner, "Steady, wait for the crosshair to settle." The Firefly fired. The shell hit the panther square in the turret ring, a single perfect shot. The German tank stopped dead, smoke pouring from its hatches. No cheers, no celebration. The Firefly reversed, moved positions, reloaded, and waited again. Because every time it fired, the flash gave away its position, and the return fire from German anti-tank guns or hidden armor was immediate and merciless. The Firefly's open battlefield duels were few. Its strength was an ambush. Its gun was so powerful that a well-placed shot could destroy a Tiger from over a mile away. Crews learned to use that range, to shoot from cover, and to vanish before the Germans could even find them. But Normandy was not made for distance. It was a maze of hedgerows, villages, and mud. So Firefly crews learned to think in seconds, to take their shot and move before the enemy could react. By the time the Allied breakout at Operation Cobra began, the Firefly had become something else entirely, not just a tank, but a symbol of Allied ingenuity. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't comfortable, but it worked, and its presence on the battlefield carried weight far beyond its numbers. Even with only one Firefly per troop, it changed how the British and Canadians fought. Infantry began calling for Fireflies by name whenever they spotted heavy armor. Air observers requested their placement in critical sectors, and German prisoners began reporting a new kind of fear. We never knew which Sherman had the long gun. We could not risk approaching any of them. That uncertainty broke the edge of German confidence. The Firefly's success wasn't just in its kills, it was psychological. It stripped away the illusion that the Tiger was untouchable, and once that belief was gone, the German armored corps began to crumble. Still, for the crews, victory always came with loss. The Firefly's thin armor offered little protection. Its massive gun made it a magnet for enemy fire, and if a shell struck the ammunition racks, the result was catastrophic. A direct hit could rip the turret off entirely, and when it burned fast. Survivors often spoke of the smell: cordite, oil, smoke, and the sickening sweetness of fire that only a tanker could recognize. Some crews would carry spare revolvers, not to fight, but to use if their tank ever caught fire. They knew the risk, and they fought anyway. By September, the Firefly was everywhere, in British armored divisions pushing through France, in Canadian units near Falaise, even in Polish regiments fighting under British command. Everywhere it went, it left the same impression: a small, wiry tank that struck like lightning. When the Germans finally pulled back across the Seine, their surviving tankers reported something that summed up the new reality. We used to look for the silhouette of a tiger to find victory. Now we look for a long-barreled Sherman, because that's where death comes from. It was the perfect irony. The machine the Allies had once feared most was now hunted by something built out of desperation: a gun too large, crammed into a tank too small, driven by men who refused to be afraid. The Firefly had turned the battlefield into a level playing field, and as the Allies pressed deeper into occupied France, the Germans began to realize that the days of their armored dominance were over. They still had Tigers, Panthers, and the massive King Tigers, but none of them could stop what was coming. Because the Firefly had proven something bigger than brute force. It had proven that innovation and courage could shatter even the strongest armor. And from Normandy to the borders of Germany, the message was clear: the hunters had changed. Autumn 1944. The war had moved beyond Normandy. The hedgerows were behind them now, replaced by open country, rolling fields, and ruined towns. But the killing hadn't stopped. It had only changed shape. The Sherman Firefly had become the spearhead of the British armored advance through France into Holland. Its long barrel, once a curiosity, even a joke, was now the symbol of fear for every German tanker who caught sight of it across a field. And the Germans were desperate. They had lost thousands of tanks since June. The Panther was still dangerous. The Tiger II, or King Tiger, was arriving in small numbers. And yet none of it was enough. The Allies had learned how to fight them. They had the Firefly. The new battlefields were wider, flatter, the kind of terrain where the 17-pounder gun could truly show its power. From the hedgerows of Normandy to the dikes of Holland, the Firefly became the executioner of the German armored corps. During Operation Market Garden, as British and Polish troops fought to hold the bridges at Arnhem and Nijmegen, Fireflies rolled with them, their guns trained on every crossroad and tree line. The Germans counterattacked with Panthers and Jagdpanthers, trying to cut the British 30th Corps off from the paratroopers trapped up north. But the Fireflies were waiting. Near Best, a column of German tanks appeared through morning mist, moving fast, confident that the Allied armor ahead was no match for them. They were wrong. The Fireflies were dug in along the dikes, half hidden by reeds and brush. The first Panther was hit at 1,200 yards. One shot through the turret, fire bursting from its hatches. The second tried to turn its gun, too slow. The Firefly's loader rammed another shell, the gun thundered, and the second Panther exploded, its ammunition cooking off like fireworks over the canal. In minutes, the ambush was over. The German counterattack had been stopped cold. One Dutch civilian watching from the edge of the village later said, "It was like lightning from nowhere. One flash, one roar, and the German tanks were burning." That was how the Firefly earned its name all over again. But even as the British and Canadians pushed through Holland, the Germans were throwing their last cards onto the table. The King Tiger, an 80-ton monster, was appearing in increasing numbers. It was bigger, stronger, and armed with an even more terrifying version of the 88mm gun. And, once again, it looked unstoppable. But the men in the Fireflies had already faced that kind of monster before, and they knew how to kill it. At Berkel, a King Tiger was spotted blocking a crossroads. Its armor was so thick that normal Shermans refused to waste ammunition on it. A Firefly from the Sherwood Rangers Yeomanry crept along a narrow lane, keeping its hull low behind the embankment. The crew could barely see through the slit of their gun sight. They waited until the Tiger turned its turret, exposing its thinner side armor. The commander whispered, "Now!" The gun fired. The shell hit the King Tiger's side, cutting straight through the armor, igniting the fuel inside. The explosion tore the turret apart. The crew cheered once, just once, then reversed and disappeared before the next German gun could find them. That was how Firefly crews fought. Hit first, disappear, never stay still. Their survival depended not on armor, but on nerve. By late 1944, The Firefly had rewritten the British doctrine of armored warfare. Where once they had relied on sheer numbers, now they relied on precision, on patience, planning, and positioning. The Germans no longer advanced in confidence. Every long shadow in a field, every barn, every hedgerow could hide a Firefly. In December, as the Battle of the Bulge raged further south, British and Canadian Fireflies fought through Holland's frozen canals and villages. Their barrels were black with soot, their engines struggling in the cold. But they kept moving, pushing back the remnants of the German armored divisions that once terrified Europe. The end was coming. By February 1945, the Allies had reached the Rhine. Beyond it lay Germany, the final prize. As the Fireflies crossed into the Reich, they saw what years of war had done. Towns reduced to rubble, forests filled with wrecked armor, tigers, panthers, Jagdpanzers, all burned out husks. And among them, the unmistakable silhouette of a Firefly, its barrel still pointing east. The British tankers who climbed out of their machines didn't celebrate. They were tired, hollow-eyed, carrying the weight of every mile they'd fought. Some of them had destroyed a dozen tanks. Some had lost every friend they'd started with. One veteran wrote in his diary, "We thought the Firefly would be our savior. But it took everything from us to make it so." When the shooting finally stopped in May, the numbers told the story. Hundreds of German tanks destroyed by Fireflies. Tigers, panthers, even king tigers that once seemed untouchable. A weapon built from desperation had become the most feared Allied tank on the Western Front. And the Germans, who once laughed at the idea of a Sherman challenging their armor, now knew better. Because in the end, it wasn't the heaviest tank that won. It was the smartest, the fastest to adapt, the one born not from arrogance, but necessity. If you believe these stories deserve to be remembered, subscribe to our channel and keep the past alive.